Welcome to today's webinar entitled Coat or Not to Coat, Durability and Schedule Factors Related to Coating Your Parking Deck. My name is Billy Zidek, Manager Special Programs for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA webpage under the Continuous Learning tab later today. Professional continuing education certificates are being offered for today's program. Those who indicated they wanted a certificate at registration and meet the requirements will receive certificates later this afternoon. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by one of our presenters. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Catherine and Melissa, our speakers for today. Ladies, take it away.
Thank you, Billy. My name is Melissa Lemhert, and I'm a senior staff designer for Gale Associates, and I work out of the Massachusetts office. Gale is an engineering firm, consulting engineering firm that specializes in building enclosure and athletics.
My name is Catherine Crouchley.
This is to coat or not to coat. So diving on in. So this is the outline of what we're going to discuss this afternoon. So we're going to start with what is the purpose of traffic coating. So we'll dive into what a traffic coating is and why you would want to coat your garage. So before we dive into the different types of systems, we will then kind of give you an overview of what else needs to be done prior to selecting or installing traffic coating. And then after that, we'll go into the different types of systems that we'll talk about. And after a system has been selected, we'll go into how it should be installed. And after it's installed, what someone would check to make sure it was installed properly. And then after it's all said and done, and we turn back over to the facilities managers, what maintenance items do you need to do? How do you need to take care of traffic coating? And then after that, we'll walk you through a few case studies that we have in some jobs that Kat and I have both worked on, and walk you through how we selected each traffic coating. So the question at this would be to coat or not to coat.
So what is traffic coating? So at a high level, it's a multi-layer protective coating, typically consisting of a primer, a base coat, a wear coat, and a top coat, all of varying thicknesses depending on what system you pick. It's also the first line of defense against the elements for your parking garage. It helps protect against the wear and tear, and it plays a critical role in protecting against the vehicle and pedestrian wear and tear. It also protects against moisture infiltration. So what's the purpose of traffic coating? So like I just said before, it limits moisture infiltration, so it provides a waterproofing aspect to your garage. It reduces the rate of carbonation, which Melissa will talk about later, the importance of that. Also, as I said before, reduces the wear and tear. So it's the first step in preventative maintenance for reducing wear and tear. So not only is it protecting your garage and the concrete structure, but it's also protecting the investment that you put into the garage by upkeeping it and preventing certain defects from occurring in your garage. It also provides aesthetic improvements. So as you look on this photo on the right, this is a newly applied traffic coating with new paint striping, and it definitely gives the garage more life. As you can tell by the walls, what that concrete color was originally, it gives it just more of an aesthetically appealing look. And it also extends your service life. So as I said before, it's not just protecting the concrete garage itself, but it's also, and how long it can last, but it's also protecting that owner's investment. So here's an example of extreme moisture infiltration. So above this, a pipe has burst and the joint above this IT has also failed. So you can see that here the water is cascading down onto this IT beam. So it's causing damage to the IT beam and eventually can just reduce the overall capacity of the structure and the garage. So why is it important to limit moisture infiltration? I've been talking about it a lot. So why do we need to prevent it from entering your garage and entering the concrete? So concrete is porous. So any water, any residue, any chloride ions that will be on that surface, it will get absorbed into the concrete, and eventually it makes its way down to the rebar, which is a big structural support and big helps with the capacity of the garage. So as it makes its way down to that rebar, it begins a process called corrosion. So corrosion begins when the chloride ions make their way through the concrete and attach onto that rebar. So as the rebar begins to corrode that rebar and exfoliate, so the steel will begin to push outward on the concrete. So concrete is meant to be used in compression. It's not strong in tension. So as this outward tension force is applied to the concrete, it's basically going to be pushing away the sound concrete from the unsound concrete that's below the rebar. So it will be creating this gap, as you can see by the delamination of fracture arrow on the illustration below. It creates that gap. So that's not visible from the surface. It's important to note that delamination isn't visible from the surface. It's only beneath the surface that it's creating that gap. And with that gap, it allows more water to pool in, more chlorides to get in, and just exacerbate the issue and the corrosion. So as the delamination accelerates, it eventually turns into a spall. So as that corrosion keeps exfoliating, it's going to push that sound concrete off, and eventually it's just going to completely pop up and completely detach from the surface. So typically maintenance men will walk around and remove these loose pieces of concrete because they can be tripping hazards. If they're above, they can be fall hazards. So this is going to leave the rebar completely exposed. So as you can see in the image below, you can see the salt-laden water is just coating the rebar, and it's just letting it pool around it and allowing it also to go deeper into the other concrete and possibly get to that second layer of rebar. And it just makes the problem worse as it keeps going, and just the spall will only grow as this spall has remained open. So now Melissa's going to get into the importance of the condition assessment.
All right, so condition assessment. So what is a condition assessment? It helps us identify extensive concrete deterioration, and it helps identify the main contributors to the deterioration. It's really important that this step is done prior to selecting a traffic coating or prior to installing a traffic coating, because if you have defects on your wearing surface that you're going to eventually coat over, the manufacturer will not warranty the traffic coating that is applied on top of defects. So types of conditions assessments. So there's two different types of condition assessments that can be done. So visual and hands-on, these can go hand in hand. So usually hands-on is done with visual and visual is done with hands-on. So a visual observation or a visual evaluation is when someone will walk up and down the garage and point out visible defects, whether it's moisture infiltration, ponding water, spalls, anything that would indicate that there's deteriorated concrete. So after that, especially with efflorescence or moisture infiltration, you really want to get hands-on. We'll dive in deeper to figure out if the concrete is sound or if it's delaminated. So as Kat previously mentioned, delaminations you can't see them. They're below the surface, and there's only a few indicators that would really tell us if it was delaminated. So with that, on the wearing surface, we use a chain drag survey. So the photo on the right shows chain dragging up and down the wearing surface of a garage. The way we pick out if concrete is delaminated or if it's sound, a sound concrete will give out a ping sound, and delaminated concrete will sound hollow. So similarly to the chain drag survey, for the overhead surfaces, we will use a hammer and basically just sound around areas that might have rebar rusting coming through or efflorescence showing to determine if it's actually delaminated. So another type of testing that can dive really deep into what the garage is made out of and what's going on with the garage is destructive testing. So with this, we would take a core testing at the slab, and with that, we can measure a few things. We can measure where the depth of the reinforcement is. We can also take a look at the condition of the reinforcement. Can we see that it's starting to corrode? How does it look? So after the core is done, we then ship it off to a lab. And with that, they do a compressive strength test. And this can give us some properties. If we don't know what the concrete is or the compressive strength of the concrete of an existing garage, this helps us get that information. It also helps us have a petrographic examination. So the photo on the right shows the screenshot of what the lab sends back to us in the report. So this is the petrographic examination that helps identify the carbonation depth using a pH indicator. So the pH, when the pH level is higher, that means there's more protection in your reinforcement. If it's obviously lower, then there's not much protection in the reinforcement, so it's going to corrode easy. So the photo on the right, the pink location shows where the carbonation is, and there's a ruler next to it which shows you the depth. So if your reinforcement only had 1.5 inches of concrete cover, so it would be around the 2-inch mark or 2 centimeter mark where your rebar would be, that's right where the pink is. So that means that your reinforcement's probably corroding and there's carbonation at that level. So this is a few concrete repairs that's been done before. So photo on the left shows what it looked like prior to doing repairs. At this garage itself, we wanted to put a traffic coating at the top. They had a really big moisture infiltration problem, but we had to address the concrete defects on the wearing surface prior. So the photo on the right shows after what it looks like. So now Kat's gonna ask a few more questions to tell us about your garage.
So we're going to start off with what your garage looks like. So it's important to tell your engineer or your manufacturer what kind of garage you're working with. So it's not all traffic coatings are applicable to any surface, any garage, any structure. So is it an above grade garage, like the photo on the top right? Is it below grade, like the bottom right? Is it made of precast concrete? Is it cast in place concrete? Is it structural steel? Is it a hybrid system like steel columns with a concrete deck? Is it a different hybrid system like concrete columns with a metal composite deck? There's a lot of variations to your structure that they're important to know. Another is your winter consideration. So how are you taking care of your garage during the winter? Are you using snow plows? Do you maybe have access to rubber tipped snow plows as the photo on the bottom right? That's important for taking care of your traffic coating. Do you do shoveling? Are you doing snow melting chemicals or sand broadcast? What methods are you using? So snow melting chemicals, as we know from before, from the delamination and the spalling and the corrosion, they leave behind chloride ions on the surface. So as we talked about earlier, with no protective coating, if you're leaving these excess chemicals and de-icing salts on your surface, the porous concrete can just soak them up and they will just get down to your rebar, and it's just accelerating the problem. So next is the review of the level of exposure. So is it a high traffic garage? Is it a parking garage for a mall, maybe a hospital, something that people are going in and out all day? There's going to be a lot of wear and tear. You're going to need something with high durability, a lot of pedestrians walking back and forth, a lot of cars going in and out at all times. Or is it moderate traffic? So is it going to be more of like an apartment complex, maybe an office garage where people are coming out in and out once a day? There's not constant movement. It's just once an exit, not a lot of walking around either, just getting in your cars and driving away. So it's important to know how much wear and tear your garage is experiencing. And next is the existing condition assessment. So Melissa said earlier the importance of the condition assessment. So have you had one recently? In the bottom right, you can see that we have, from a previous project, we've laid out all the repairs and the quantities and just everything that needs to be repaired to the direct concrete itself. So before the traffic coating can be applied, all of these need to be addressed and fixed, because not all traffic coating have concrete bridging abilities. And as you can see on the top right, we have a delaminated concrete, possibly even a spall that's under the traffic coating, that's just pushing up with the tension that the rebar is creating beneath and is pushing up. And the only thing that's really keeping that concrete in place, as you can see, is the edges of that traffic coating. And even in the center, the tension has gotten too great where it's just cracking in the middle. So now the traffic coating isn't even waterproofing anymore. Now it just has breaches in the center. So it's kind of negating all of that money that you just put into applying this traffic coating and repairing your garage. If you miss some spalls, then the traffic coating isn't able to properly do its job. And finally, just some application limitations. So for the duration of your garage closure. So a lot of universities, a lot of hospitals depend on revenue from their garages. So how long are you able to close your garage? Can you afford to do it for a full weekend? Can you only do it in the morning? What's your ability for closing that garage? The next is odor sensitivity. So like any chemical application, like if you're painting your house, there will be an off gas, there'll be a chemical odor that's coming off of it. So you need to take into account if you have the proper ventilation. So if it's a below grade garage, what are you doing to combat that ventilation? Are there close to neighboring buildings? Are there people around you that you need to notify the situation? Are there occupied spaces above or below? Who do you need to tell in order to make sure that this is a smooth process where no one gets alarmed by a sudden chemical smell wafting down out of the garage? And then finally, with everything, it's budget. So what can you afford? Like anything, there are varying prices of traffic coating for high durability. What does waterproofing? Some just do aesthetic coatings. So with that, what budget can you afford? What traffic coating works best for your budget and application time? And then Melissa's going to talk about where you can not coat.
When would you not coat? So a few things where we wouldn't coat over are precast parking garage joints. With that, it's because there's movement in the joints. The joints are designed to move. So the traffic coating just can't withstand the movement, and it will actually crack over your joints. Or parking decks with large degree of movement. Some others would be moisture mitigation. So maybe you really don't need a traffic coating. Maybe you just need to replace your joint sealants. That's a very easy, cheap, cost-effective way to keep up with your garage. Maybe you need to replace deteriorated drain components, like the photo on the right. Maybe your drain bowls look like this, and it's not really bringing the water where it needs to. Maybe after your garage was built, where the drains are located, it's not properly pitched. Maybe installing concrete crickets to actually shed the water to those drains would be beneficial. Or if installing concrete crickets isn't the option, maybe a secondary drain connecting into the drainage system might be it, where there's a large area of ponding water. So now diving into the wonderful world of traffic coatings. So there's two different types of traffic coatings we're going to be talking about today: waterproofing and aesthetic. We'll be talking about 3 of each different types of systems. So the difference between waterproofing or aesthetic, well, waterproofing is a waterproofing membrane. Where we would install this is whether maybe there's an occupied space below. So maybe there's a maintenance location or maintenance room right below your parking garage in the basement. We see a pattern of moisture infiltration from the condition assessment. Or we're protecting extensive structural concrete repairs. So after the condition assessment was done, maybe we've identified low structural repairs that really need to be done. This is just another way to really protect that and protect the integrity of your garage. Or aesthetic. Are you looking at the slab on grade? Do you have a slab on grade? We put an aesthetic coating down there. Maybe you're just really trying to upgrade the look of your garage. It's another way to make it look a little fun. Or maybe you're trying to add traction to the concrete surface where every single pedestrian entering and exiting the garage is. Maybe it's right before an elevator, or maybe it's right before a stair tower. So diving into waterproofing. So the 3 different types of systems we're going to be talking about for waterproofing is a polyurethane system, a polyurethane epoxy hybrid system, and a PMMA or PUMA system. So the first one is the polyurethane system. So there's 2 different types of systems with this. There's a 1-part system and there's a 2-part system. The 1-part system was the original traffic coating system, and it came about in the 1970s. It had some flaws with it. It was a 75% solids, and the curing was based upon what the atmosphere and the moisture in the atmosphere was. So as you probably think, it took a while for it to cure. And then with that, they came the 2-part system. They addressed the flaws with the 1-part system, and there was a 2-part system. So the 2-part system is 100% solids, and it cures a little faster. It still uses the atmosphere and the weather conditions around to cure, but it was a lot faster than the 1-part system. So some of the applications would be a low permeable, so an elevated surface. Maybe it's the roof level of a garage. Cast in place decks and precast concrete decks as well. So the illustration on the right shows roughly how thick a typical polyurethane system is. So the pros and cons. So the pros, it's a waterproofing membrane. It can bridge small existing cracks. So a crack up to 1/16 of an inch, you don't have to repair, and you can just coat right over. It meets the VOC standards, so it doesn't smell as much. It adheres well to concrete, and it's non-shrinking. So some of the cons is it's sensitive to moisture. So as I said, it kind of cures relative to the moisture in the air and whatnot. It was a little bit better than that one-part system, but it still takes a little bit longer for it to cure. And then schedule implications. It takes roughly 1 day for each coat to cure. So that increases the time your garage is shut down. So the next system is the polyurethane or / epoxy hybrid system. This is a 2-component system. It's similar to the polyurethane system, but a little bit better. The base coat is the epoxy layer, and it has its benefits to it. It adheres better to the concrete than the polyurethane system. The polyurethane with the wear coat and the top coat is UV stable. So an epoxy system would yellow with the sun beating down on it. And Kat will dive into that a little bit more later. And where we would install this, again, cast in place decks or precast decks. You can see the illustration on the right shows the thicknesses. It's a little thicker, maybe it's probably a little thicker than the polyurethane system, but again, the thickness of every single system can increase based upon the durability you're looking for as well. So the pros and cons. Durability for high wear areas. So it's a thicker system than the polyurethane. You can increase the thickness as well if you have need a super durable coating. It's waterproofing. It also can bridge small existing cracks as well. So 1/16 of an inch crack, you don't have to repair, you can just coat right over it. And it's also non-shrinking. So some of the cons is that the polyurethane layers are sensitive to moisture. So the top coat and the wear coat are sensitive to moisture. They have low movement capabilities, and it takes at least a day for each coat to cure, and it increases the time your garage is shut down as well. So the PMMA and Puma system. This is the last waterproofing system we're going to talk about today. It's a 2-component system. It's rapid curing and it's highly flexible. So this system is one of the newer systems, and it's what we like to call the Cadillac system. It's super durable and it cures very fast. So some of the applications you would do this is a garage entrance or exit, just because of how durable the system is. Maybe a loading dock. So the system itself is actually can withstand petroleum products being applied onto it. So maybe you have a loading dock with huge vehicles kind of sitting there for a long time. Or you have high traffic areas. So maybe it's around a turnaround of a garage where it sees almost every single car that comes in and out of your garage. So the illustration on the right shows just how thick this system is. You can see that the base layer or the membrane is super thick and going all the way up. They're almost the same thickness. So what are the pros and cons of this? So the pros, it's high durability. So it's a super thick. This is probably the thickest traffic coating product that there is. It's also waterproofing. It cures within 3 to 4 hours. So if you have a super small area that you need to apply, they could get this done in a weekend. So your shutdown for your garage would be a lot less than the other 2 systems. Some of the cons are that it's odor. It does stink. So maybe your garage is right next to an occupied building. Maybe there's occupied space below. This might not be the best product for that, because you'd have to coordinate with the tenants and try to get them out of the building while you install this for the weekend. So it can be, scheduling can be difficult with this. It is also prone to cracking. Even though it is flexible, it does crack when it shrinks a little bit. It is expensive. So it's 2 times more than the polyurethane system. But you're paying for what you're getting. You're getting a more durable and faster curing product. So now Kat's going to dive into the aesthetic coatings.
So there are 3 aesthetic coatings I'm going to be talking about today. There's the epoxy broadcast, the latex vinyl copolymer system, and the penetrating sealer. So to start off with the epoxy broadcast system. So it's a monolithic aesthetic coating that can be used to restore moderately worn or pitted surfaces. So as Melissa talked about earlier, it can be used as the base or leveling coat of the epoxy hybrid system that she's using. So it also creates a cheaper system overall. It's relatively inexpensive. And where you can apply is concrete surfaces. So concrete decks, pedestrian walkways, anywhere where you're not looking for waterproofing, but you are looking for just an improved aesthetic. So to get into the pros and cons of it. So it can cure in temperatures as low as 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So that gives you more wiggle room. Typically, traffic coatings need to cure around 50 degrees plus. So this is kind of going to give you more schedule time, either in that fall to winter transition or that spring to summer, or that winter to spring transition. You'll have more time to work and find time in your schedule in order to apply it. So there are many colors to achieve. So since it is an aesthetic coating, typically with regular waterproofing traffic coatings, you can only have a dark gray, you can only have a light gray. Those are like really your only 2 options. But with this, you have many options. So if you want to do maybe a main entry corridor, you can do your school colors, you can do the school logo, you can do the hospital logo, whatever you need to achieve, you can get that color. And you can also get flakes in it to add an additional texture to it, just to give it more of an aesthetically appeasing look, as well as give it a better traction to your surface. So as Melissa said earlier, if you're trying to apply it maybe outside of an elevator bay, you'll have more traction with those flakes in it. It's heavy duty, so it's good for pedestrians. So as I said before, if you have a main corridor, anything like that, people are just constantly walking across it and you're trying to get a lot of bang for your buck, I would recommend using in that location, and this would be your traffic coating. And again, economical, so if you're looking for an inexpensive way to improve the aesthetics of your area, this would be the traffic coating for you. So as we said before, in the cons, it's not waterproofing. So if you're trying to use it for the waterproofing capabilities, this would not be the one to use. And an experience is chalking. So as Melissa said earlier, it does yellow over UV. So we don't recommend it anywhere that's exposed, that gets a lot of sunlight. So if you're applying it for if you're applying it for aesthetics, and it's just yellowing over time, there really is, it kind of negates the purpose of you trying to pick out that perfect color that's just slowly yellowing. And for schedule implications, it takes about 8 hours per coat to cure, so it's only a 2-layer system, so it's going to be quicker than most. It's not the fastest traffic coating like the Puma, but it's not going to take a full day to cure, so you can get your area covered within a weekend. Next is a latex vinyl copolymer system. So this is a rigid and breathable coating. So it means that it's going to allow water to escape from the top and allow vapor to escape from the top. So as you can see here, it's good for composite decks, which is shown on the right, as well as split slabs. So if you're looking on the right, this composite deck graphic here, it's a composite deck, which means that it's a metal deck with concrete on top. So if you can imagine, you're applying a regular waterproofing traffic coating on top of that. There's moisture within your concrete before it's applied, and now it's on there, so it's completely waterproofed. So now the water is trying to escape. It can't escape from the top because of that waterproofing system, but also can't escape from the bottom because of that metal deck. So with it being a normal waterproofing system, that water is just going to sit there and possibly even corrode your metal deck, just attack the reinforcement within that slab. So that's something you want to avoid. So this is why with this being a breathable coating, it allows that moisture to escape. So it's not going to be trapped in there kind of like a waterproofing sandwich with nowhere to go, just eating at your metal, you're corroding your reinforcement. This is a good solution for that. And then get into the pros and cons. So as I said before, it's breathable, allows moisture to transfer out of that concrete, allows it to go somewhere that's not just going to sit on your rebar, sit on that metal decking. On your split slab, just sit there on top of that waterproofing in between. It's odorless, so you won't have to worry about notifying others. You will possibly only need 1 fan for ventilation. It's not going to be a huge concern, and a huge part of your process is dealing with that odor and that ventilation. And then getting into cons, so it's naturally rigid, so it's prone to cracking. So as Melissa said earlier, a lot of parking decks do have flex to them. So this layer would not flex with it. So it would create cracks and just breaches within that coating. So that's where it comes in with not a true waterproofing barrier. Since it does crack and it will leave those breaches, water will still be able to get in. So because of that, it's not recommended over occupied spaces. If you have an office below, if you have an apartment complex below, anything like that, you wouldn't want to have to be dealing with complaints of water leaking through due to the vehicles passing above, due to rain coming in. So it's not recommended if you're truly trying to waterproof and prevent water from getting through that concrete at all. And then finally, we have the penetrating sealers for the non-waterproofing aesthetic options. So a penetrating sealer seals the pores of the concrete below the surface. So it's going to create that chemical barrier that's basically preventing anything from passing through. So as I said earlier, concrete is porous. So this sealer is going in and just sealing those barriers and not allowing any concrete, any ions, any waterproof to pass through. So it's recommended for slab-on-grade application. It's also vapor permeable, much like the latex vinyl copolymer coating that I talked about earlier. So with slab-on-grade, as you can see from the illustration below, damp soil will constantly let off vapors, water, anything like that. So you're going to want it to be able to escape from the top, just like the latex copolymer coating that I just talked about. You don't want it trapped in there like a sandwich. You want it to be able to go out and breathe. You don't want it just sitting in there and attacking your force band, getting into your concrete. So this would be a good application for slab-on-grade. So to get into the pros, it's low odor. So again, not to be concerned with having to notify people, having to deal with ventilation. It's low odor. It's just not something that you'd have to deal with. And as I said before, it limits the chloride and ion migration. So with that sealing that it does on top, nothing will be able to get in, only stuff will be able to escape. So it's creating that semi-permeable layer that allows water to escape but also not infiltrate. And it helps with the freeze-thaw damage. So with slab-on-grade, within the first, typically around Massachusetts, it's the 4 feet of depth that will freeze and thaw as the seasons change. It causes the soil around it to kind of expand and contract as the water freezes and thaws and shrinks and expands. So it helps mitigate that damage. It does not change the color of the concrete, so you don't have to worry about it yellowing with the UV exposure or anything. And if you like the current color of your concrete, you just don't have to worry about that changing. It's inexpensive, and as well as I said before, it's vapor permeable. So to get into the cons, so they have no waterproofing abilities and also no crack bridging properties. So concrete will crack eventually. It could be held in very good conditions, but it will crack. It's just one of the things that's inevitable with concrete. So this doesn't have any crack bridging properties. So when the concrete cracks and it will separate, the sealer will separate with it. So it's not gonna keep the concrete together, kind of like we saw earlier with that other waterproofing on the conditions assessment that I talked about earlier, where it kind of trapped it below. It's not going to do that. It's just going to break apart with it. So that's where the non-waterproofing also comes into play. Service life is 5 years or less. So because of this cracking, because it's kind of rigid and it won't bridge those cracks, it needs to be switched out more often. And for schedule implications, it's about 4 to 6 hours for a coat to cure. So it's definitely one of our faster systems, almost comparable to the Puma system that we have. So what is right for your garage? So Melissa and I have created this flow chart that shows the process that we go through when selecting traffic coating. So Melissa's going to go through this later with our case studies to show you the process that we go through. But this will eventually help you determine whether to coat or not to coat. So now we're going to installation requirements. So now that we've selected our traffic coating, what are we doing to make sure that it's installed properly? So you're going to want a clean, dry, and sound substrate. So as I said before, with the sound substrate, you're going to want to make sure that a condition assessment is done and all of the existing defects are repaired. You don't want to install a traffic coating over it and then immediately breaches are created because of a crack, because of a spall, because of delamination. You want to make sure that none of that's going to happen and you're starting on a clean, fresh surface. So clean surface, you're going to want to make sure that there's no debris, no dust. Much like if you're trying to paint a boat, if you're trying to paint a wall, you kind of want to like sand it down, you want to clean it, make sure that there's no debris, loose concrete trapped under that, because as you can imagine, it just won't stick there. It will have that loose debris in between and it's just not going to stick and it will just peel off, maybe create bubbles. It's just not going to look as aesthetically pleasing as you'd want it, as well as just negate the waterproofing abilities. So for surface preparation, according to the International Concrete Restoration Institute, you're going to want a concrete surface profile of 3 or 4. So a concrete surface profile is on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being no amplitude, pretty smooth, pretty sound, and 10 being very with high amplitude, a lot of crevices, a lot of creeks. So you're going to want to have a 3 or 4 concrete surface profile so that your concrete has enough agitation that will have bite to it, and that traffic coating will in fact attach that concrete, but not so much that if you have a 10 concrete surface profile, you're going to be having a lot of cracks and a lot of ridges that you're going to need to fill, and that's going to do nothing except drive up your costs, because you're going to need more product to install in order to get that level base for the newer, for the additional levels. You're going to want to check moisture content. So with concrete, like I said before, with concrete, with water, it will off gas. So as I talked about with the sealer and the covinyl polymer coating, those allow the water to escape. But with a waterproofing coating, the water will not be able to go anywhere. So it's going to be trapped in there. So you want to make sure that as much moisture is out of the concrete as possible, because as the concrete cures and that moisture is trying to escape, the traffic coating could bubble, it could peel off, it just won't finally install and cure correctly. And temperature and weather implications. So you're going to want to make sure that your temperature range is in accordance with the manufacturer's specs, just with how traffic coating cures. It can be finicky sometimes, as well as the weather implications. You can't install it when it rains. You're going to need, as I said, a clean and dry substrate to attach it to. So quality assurance. So now your traffic coating is installed. So how do we make sure that it was installed properly? So we can do a mock-up. So as I showed on the first slide, there was an area with just a traffic coating mock-up. You can do 5 square feet, but on that first slide, we did a whole bay. It's basically just to make sure that it was installed correctly. There's going to be no bubbling, no peeling. It was installed as it should have been. What's also important is to make sure that you have a manufacturer come out and visit the site. So this is to make sure that they come and look at the mock-up, make sure that it was installed in accordance with their specifications, that the installation was done correctly, that the concrete preparation was correct. And this is really just to make sure that you have that warranty that the manufacturer will give you. So in case anything else goes wrong later down the road, you have that warranty to lean on. And we do a pull test. So basically a pull test is where we're, as you can probably guess, pulling the traffic coating up, and we're just testing to make sure that that adhesion to not only the concrete substrate, but also the layers in between is good. So on the right, you can see that we have a isolated sample where we have the concrete cord. So you're not pulling up just a huge area of traffic coating. You want to make sure that it's an easily patchable area. So we separate it. We just drill maybe 2 inches down just to make sure that that concrete, that traffic coating is isolated. Then you're going to attach the puck on it. In the top right, you can see the little puck attached to it, and that's going to apply a pressure to the traffic coating, basically trying to pull it up and see what that adhesion is, and it's going to give you the adhesion number. So once we get that number, we're going to compare it to the manufacturer's specs, make sure it's all in line with what they require, and that you're getting what you need to from your traffic coating. And then next, we're going to check the material thickness. So if you're paying for the Puma system, you want to make sure that the thickness is what you request. If you have a high wear area, it's experiencing a lot of wear and tear, you're going to want a lot of durability in it. You want to make sure that you're getting that. So if it is thinner, it's going to have a shorter service life. It will wear and tear faster than you'd want it to. So you want to make sure that you're getting what you paid for, what's being installed, what's in accordance with the specifications. So now we're going to go into maintenance requirements. So now your traffic coating is installed. So what are we doing to take care of it? So going back to the snow removal program, so shoveling, so you can shovel, you can do de-icing, you could do plows. So with plows, we recommend rubber tip plows. So if you can imagine that you're shoveling your driveway and you're running it along, and then all of a sudden your shovel gets caught on a little piece of uneven concrete, and all of a sudden you're getting shoved in the stomach. And if you can imagine that with a plow, it's just going to catch the edge of that traffic coating and just rip a hole in it and cause it to no longer be a waterproofing surface. So we want to make sure that if you are using snow removal programs, you want to be gentle with the traffic coating. You use rubber blades. If you don't have rubber tipped snow plows, you can go into de-icing materials. So as we talked about before, de-icing materials do leave chlorides and ions behind. But with this new traffic coding, as long as you're not applying it to excess and then you have a reasonable amount on, this would be a good option to use. And finally, you can also use the SAN broadcast system, which we talked about earlier, just for creating traction, making sure that everyone's safe within the garage. We would advise against this since, as you can imagine, SAN kind of agitates the top of the traffic coding. So that can create breaches, again, make it non-waterproofing. So just throughout your snow removal program, just making sure that you can do everything you can to prevent any breaches within that traffic coding. And then a huge step that not many people love doing because it kind of sounds like a huge task is the spring and fall washdown. So as you can see in the bottom right, cars will come in and from the snow, from just coming in from outside, picking up a lot of dirt, a lot of salt, they'll come in and they'll park. And as they park and they leave their car for the day, a lot of that ice, a lot of that melts. So the chloride ions and all that salt will just sit and settle on the top of that concrete surface. As you can see in the bottom right, you have piles and just puddles of salt just sitting in and soaking into that porous concrete. So you want to make sure for the spring and fall that you're just doing a huge wash down, trying to get as much of that salt, as much of those chlorides off your surface as you can to make sure that it's not going to be soaking into your concrete, just causing further damage that it doesn't need to. And now Melissa's going to go into the case studies.
All right, so diving into a few case studies that we have done. So the first one is the 333 Longwood Ave Garage. It's in Boston, Massachusetts. It's a garage for a hospital. It's also a public garage too. So as you can imagine, it's a high wear, sees a lot of cars in and out every single day. It's also above grade garage. We installed two different types of systems here. We installed the Puma system at the entrance, and we installed a polyurethane system at the roof. The main entrance, you couldn't really shut it down. They did have one entrance on the back side of that photo on the right, where you can see the arrow. But that was basically just an in. There was no exit. And it was hard to locate the traffic and get the traffic from the basement all the way up without shutting down the garage for a very long time. They also couldn't afford to do it. They rely on revenue to come in and out, and this garage is always busy. So for as the roof, they could close it down for a long period of time. There's really only probably like 20 to 30 cars that park up there. You're not seeing everyone coming in and out. It's just an easy way to close a garage at the roof level. So running through the flow chart that Kat and I put together. So the first question is, did we want waterproofing? So if you could think back to that video that Kat showed you where it was just pouring in through the joints, that was actually this garage. So with that, we did want a waterproofing system. We also had a lot of structural repairs that need to be done, so we really want an extra layer of waterproofing on top of it. So the next question is it a concrete garage? So this is it was a precast above grade garage, so yep, that would be the answer. So was there a time constraint? So the entry, there was a time constraint. They couldn't close it down for a long period of time and afford to lose all of that money for the cars parking. So that would be a yes. So with that, we came to the PMMA or the Puma system. So going back to the roof, was there a time constraint? No. We could close off that roof for at least a week to install the traffic coating. Was there heavy vehicular traffic? It's the roof, so you're probably seeing the 20 cars go in and out, and it's not always completely full either. The roof is usually the last place that people want to park. So the answer would be no. So that's how we installed the polyurethane system. So our next case study is the Simmons Palace Road Garage. So this is a below grade garage, and we installed two different types of traffic coating. We installed a polyurethane system, and we installed a clear sealer at the slab on grade. With this was a more of a private garage. It was seeing the same amount of cars in and out. It was actually for a university, so your student ID or your faculty ID was the only thing that could scan you into this garage. So it saw almost the same amount of cars every day, or maybe a little less. With universities, it's easier to shut down your private garage for a longer period of time, or even semi-public garage, because you have your winter and you have your summer breaks. So running through the flow chart again. So first question is waterproofing. So yeah, we wanted a waterproofing membrane. We had a lot of full depth repairs in the slab that we really wanted to protect. So the answer was yes. Is it a concrete garage? Yep, it's a cast in place below grade concrete garage. So was there a time constraint? So as I mentioned, this was for a university. So we were able to get in during the summer months and shut it down for a long duration so we could install really whatever system we wanted. So there was no time constraint. And the next question would be, was it heavy vehicular traffic? So as I mentioned, it was a pretty private garage. So whoever was able to park there with their student ID or their faculty ID and was assigned to that garage were the ones that could get in and out. So the answer would be no. So with that, we had the polyurethane system that's what we installed. So if you think back, we did slab on grade. There was slab on grade in the basement. So going all the way back to the first question is, do you want it to be waterproofing? So no, because the slab on grades, we shouldn't put a waterproofing system down. So the next question is it a slab on grade? Yes. So with that, we have the penetrating sealer. So finally, some lessons learned that Kat and I have learned with installing many different types of traffic coating products and different garage and different conditions. So a few things are the surface prep is critical. This is really ideal, not just at the beginning when you install your primer, but after each layer. So if you're installing the polyurethane system, that takes at least a day to cure. You can imagine it being at the top level of a parking garage, that it's going to see every type of debris throughout a day. It's going to see leaves, it's dirt. So it's really critical that before the next layer is applied, that surface is cleaned. In the photo on the top right, you can see that the traffic coating failed shortly after it was fully cured. And it didn't fail at the concrete, it failed at the base layer because it wasn't properly cleaned. So the adhesion between the two or all the layers is really critical with the surface prep as well. So what are implications? So most of the traffic coating products say 50 degrees and rising, but we found that when it is 50 degrees and rising, sometimes if you install at 8 a.m. and it's 50 degrees, but it's going to heat up to 70 degrees during your cure time, that your traffic coating is not going to cure evenly. It could come with bubbles and a bunch of other defects that you're going to have to fix. So we found that if you install at the peak temperature, so roughly around noon, and you install into the afternoon when it's starting to slowly cool off, that it turns out to be a lot better of a product, and there's a lot less defects that come up to the surface. We've also noticed that if you have a parking garage and you're coating the top coat, and there's a bunch of buildings around you that are shading the sun in the morning compared to the afternoon, that when you install, it could also vary the cure times. So the sun is beating down on it, it's heating up the concrete in one area compared to the other area you're coating. So there could be isolated defects in one area where the sun's not completely beating down. So quality assurance, so testing procedures are done correctly. So it is important that a third-party person or a third-party company comes in at the end and does our pull tests. It's really critical that that's done correctly. If it could look fine once it's cured, but shortly down the road, if it's not properly, each layer is not properly prepared or cleaned specifically, or there's not enough grip between each layer, and it wasn't done correctly, the pull test will bring that up. So instead of a year down the road when everyone's gone and you now have a bubble in your concrete or it's failed in this location, the pull test can be a way to prevent that. And then coating over moving joints. So as I said, we don't typically like to coat over precast parking garage joints or joints that will see movement. It will create cracking in the traffic coating if it's done over the joints. So the way we have come combat that is we either terminate the traffic coating right before the joint, or you pull up your joint sealant and you coat actually into the joint and then put your sealant on top of it. So with that, that is to coat or not to coat. Thank you.
While we wait for people to put some questions in the chat box, is there any additional information that you think everyone should know about?
I think that there's a lot of different options out there, and there's specifically one coating that would probably work for everyone's garage. The traffic coatings are a great tool to have to limit moisture infiltration, but it's also a maintenance item. That's the biggest thing, is you shell out a lot of money to put this coating down, but it's really how do you take care of it after to get the most bang for your buck at the end of the day.
Okay. First question is, will the presentation slides be available?
I think, Bill, you could send them out to some of the attendants.
Okay, thank you. I will do that. I have a couple questions here for you. Does existing coating need to be completely removed?
Yes, definitely. We want the existing coating that has failed to be completely removed, and so that your traffic coating is actually being installed to the concrete and it adheres properly.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, what are thicknesses of the systems?
So if you could think about the slides we showed previous, I will flash back to them. Oh, maybe not, might be too much. But the Puma system is really the thickest system. That's your most durable system. The polyurethane and the epoxy system are relatively similar to thickness. The polyurethane epoxy system's a little bit thicker, so you're going to be a little bit more durable. But overall, the systems can vary. So you can, if you really want the polyurethane system and you need a heavy duty coat, you can have a thicker system with that. It's just going to take longer for it to cure and whatnot. Whereas your acidic coatings are pretty thin, just because there's not much to it and not many layers to it.
Okay. Our next question is, are there any issues with a transition to a Puma system and a different system?
We haven't found that, but as always, whatever product, different manufacturers might have different recommendations or different how they would do it. So I would always reach out to the manufacturer of the coating that you have selected and ask them about how they would terminate stuff. Usually we found that as long as you're lapping the system 6 inches on top of each other or terminating them properly, there shouldn't really be an issue.
Okay, well, thank you. Our next question is, if slab on grade has a vapor barrier below, does that change coating? Does that change the coating selection?
It could, but the vapor barrier there's a lot of unknowns with it. So the vapor barrier is put down when the garage is constructed, and then they put rebar into it, and then they put the concrete into it. So if there's any type of breach in between the vapor barrier, you're not going to see it. So with that, you don't really know what's below it. You don't know if there wasn't one installed. You might not know what is below your slab on grade. So we still recommend that a penetrating sealer is the way to go instead of a traffic coating system.
What is the minimum thickness you have seen that has held up well?
Usually the minimum thickness we have ever specified is the 60 mils. So I'll go back to that slide. This system is usually the thinnest we can apply, and it's held up pretty well over time.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, can a parking ramp be done in sections like by floor or traffic lanes? first, then parking spots to minimize time the entire ramp is closed.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically, if you're trying to keep your garage open during the installation, we have done it in segments. But the one thing that you really want to note is that you need to lap the traffic coating 6 inches on either side. So they are going to protrude a little bit into the driving lanes, but that is definitely a way to get your traffic coating done without closing off your entire ramp to your garage.
Okay, it looks like we have time for one more question here. Is epoxy-coated rebar subject to corrosion in the instance of moisture intrusion into a slab?
Nope. So the nice thing about the epoxy coated rebar is that it will not corrode unless there's something happened to the epoxy layer on top of it and there's just it's no longer there, but it's not going to corrode your system. It is a little bit more expensive, but in our concrete repairs that we do, that's what we specify, just so it holds up over time.
Okay. Well, that's the end of our questions. So I'd like to thank both Melissa and Catherine for their time today for this informative webinar. And as always, to our attendees, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. So until next time, be safe, have a wonderful 4th of July holiday, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.